welcome to lecture at 2.
How I gonna do it?
Say number 2.
Number 2.
Metabolism.
I'm gonna do that.
Say metabolism.
You say that.
Metabolism. Oh, don't lift up the microphone. All right, so before we metabolize, I just want to do a quick review so that you understand, big picture what's going on. So what we did last time, right, is we digested. And remember, digestion is outside of the body. And this is where we're now mechanically and chemically digesting so we can get macromolecules into monomers. So our main macromolecules, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And my monomers are going to be amino acids, simple sugars, and then free fatty acids. That's digestion. Now, remember, after I digest, then I can absorb, right? So absorption now is me getting these monomers from the lumen. Remember, the lumen is external environment. Let's get them into the body through the cells, through the interstitium, and into our blood flow, right? And now we can disperse all of these monomers to every cell in the body, okay? Now, once these monomers leave the bloodstream and enter cells, now we can have metabolism, which means that we're gonna either break them down for energy or build something, right, with these monomers. Now, monomers have 3 fates, okay? Here they are. Number 1, we can use them immediately for energy, right? And we did this in the first part of our class. We took molecules, we broke them down, we made ATP, right? Number 2, I can build things. I can undergo anabolism, yes? All the structures in my body. You want to have another cell? You need amino acids, you need sugars, you need fats to make those cells, right? And then also, for some of these molecules, you can store them. Okay, so storing is an anabolic process, is because you have to now build from these monomers another macromolecule. Okay, and you can only store sugars and fats. So let's talk about this process now. All right, let's talk about the nutrient pool, right? So this is under what we call fed state metabolism, which means this is the metabolic pathways that occur when you eat, okay? When you're fed. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have all these nutrients from the plasma, blood, that I showed you folks in the previous slide, and they're ready to go. Okay, for immediate use, and some excess nutrients are stored. So that's what we're doing right now, okay? All right, let's get started. Fed state metabolism, right? So I have all my monomers in the bloodstream, and yes, they're going to have to leave. They're going to leave the bloodstream because they need to enter the cells. So this is what's happening with free fatty acids, right? Is that we undergo a process called lipogenesis. Whenever we digest fat, we first must store it in adipocytes, and then adipocytes can release it as needed, okay? So lipo for fat, genesis means to make from new, right? So fats get stored. Now, fats can also be stored in the liver. If you have excess fat in your diet, right, you're not only storing it inside adipocyte cells, you can also store it in liver cells. And you find in some individuals, if they have too much fat storage in their liver cells, their liver cells can burst open, which is not a good thing. Now, let's talk about simple sugars. Our brain needs simple sugars, okay? We need it. Otherwise, we go into a coma, right? And so we automatically take sugar, metabolize it into the brain. Now, we can store sugar, and the 2 places that we store sugar in the form of glycogen, which is a big sugar carbohydrate molecule, is in skeletal muscle and in the liver. Okay, and so these are your main storage places for sugar. So glycogenesis, I'm making glycogen from scratch. Now, if you have too much simple sugars and you've maxed out the amount of glycogen that can be stored in your skeletal muscle and your liver, you will now take that simple sugar and you will make fat. That's why I always laugh when I go to the store and people are like, oh, are you on a diet? You should eat this cookie. And I look in the ingredients and it's all sugar, and it has way more sugar than normal cookies have, right? It's because what's going to happen is if you have that much sugar, you're going to start making it into fat anyway. So might as well have the full fat cookies, unless your doctor specifically is against that. Okay. Don't listen to me. I'm not your physician. Now, amino acids are not stored, right? And every semester, somebody wants to argue against that. They're not. So remember, amino acids are structural, okay? And so if you have too much amino acids, what's going to happen then is you won't store them in the form of amino acids. They will be turned into fat, right? You can't just store amino acids. And lots of times I have students say, well, if you need amino acids, you can get them from your skeletal muscle. Yes, but that's not storage. You're tearing down structural units in your body in order to get that amino acids. That's not a storage unit. That's a sacrifice of tissue. Now let's talk about metabolic rate. So here, there's something called the basal metabolic rate. And all that is how much energy you use to run your body when you're at rest, okay? Not when you're exerting yourself. And there's a lot of ways that people nowadays can measure their basic metabolic rate, and you can get into a bod pod is what they call them, and there's some other things that you can do. But how you measure your metabolic rate is by how much heat you give off or how much oxygen you consume. Now, for some of you, depending on how much biology you've had, you've seen this chemical reaction 1,000 times. Now, I'm not going to ask you folks to regurgitate this chemical reaction, but I do expect you folks to understand the premise of this reaction because you've been doing it, right, for months now. So here, why we measure heat or oxygen consumption for metabolic rate is the following, right? So if we use, and so this is glucose, and you're not going to memorize the chemical makeup of glucose, but that's a glucose molecule, right? And you know that if you take glucose and run it through your cellular respiration machine in aerobic conditions, oxygen conditions, you can take ADP and phosphate, stick them together to form ATP, right? And you folks know that there's byproducts to cellular respiration. We make carbon dioxide, and we can also make metabolic water. Is this ringing a bell or what? Say yes. All right. Now, here, as a process or a byproduct, what we call it, a byproduct of making ATP is heat, right? So that's your byproduct. And that's why you can measure how much your energy, how much energy you use at rest. All right. Now, our metabolism is regulated by thyroid hormone. And we had this discussion already, right? That thyroid hormone, when it binds to its receptor, well, let's just write that down. Thyroid hormone, when it binds to the thyroid hormone receptor, what it does is it increases metabolism. That's the cellular response. And what does that mean? That I increase the cell's production of enzymes that are running catabolism and or metabolism, depending on what the cell needs at that time, right? Right? So here are factors that influence your basal metabolic rate, right? Age. The younger you are, the more energy you use because you're growing, right? Genetic sex, okay? So genetic males have higher basic metabolic rate because you tend to have, generally speaking, more muscle mass. More muscle mass means that you utilize more energy to run that muscle, okay? And then the amount of lean muscle mass, which is tied into genetic sex, okay? Hormones, right? Specifically testosterone levels, right? Because testosterone levels are allowing you to have the growth of more lean muscle mass. Okay? Your activity level. The more you exercise and the more you move, the more you burn. And then, of course, diet will determine metabolic rate, right? So of these factors, genetics also plays a role. So you'll see some people will say, oh my God, I diet and I eat well and I still have, I'm heavy. And it's frustrating for some people, right? Is because they're just always heavy, and no matter what they do, it's really hard for them to have whatever gains that they're trying to pursue. And then you look at some people and they're just skinny. And then the bigger people are like, look at her, she's skinny. Look at him, he's thin, he's so lucky. And then sometimes the skinny people are like, oh my God, I'm trying to eat so much and I'm trying to gain weight and I just can't do it. And so everybody's got their problems. But of these factors, what are the factors we can control? We can't control genetic sex. We can't control age. We cannot control the genes that we are given. But we can control how much we take in regards to food, which is translated now into energy, and then how much we exercise. All right, party people, that is it for lecturette 2. For lecturette 3, we're going to get into glucose homeostasis.